Number 10. Blockbuster. Blockbuster might not be an A-list Bat villain, but I don't think I've ever mentioned him on this channel before, and I thought it was about time that we gave him a little shout out. We see you, Blockbuster, we see you. While not one of the most popular Bat villains, Blockbuster still packs a mighty punch. The current incarnation of the villain is Roland Desmond, who has reappeared in the Prime Earth continuity throughout the current Nightwing series. In fact, even though he started out as Detective Comics, he's now actually thought of more as a Nightwing villain. Even more recently resurfacing in Nightwing in issue 83. Blockbuster has also had many incarnations throughout the years since the character's first appearance as Mark Desmond back in 1965 in Detective Comics issue 345. Some versions have been tougher and more powerful than others, but all of them have possessed some level of super strength, durability, and stamina, usually granted to them by the Blockbuster serum, and often at the cost of some intelligence. However, the current Blockbuster does not suffer the same weakness, instead simply suffering physical pain if remaining in his transformed super buff state for too long.
And a 9, Condiment King. Okay, before you yell at me, hear me out a little bit, okay? Condiment King may just seem like a random dude who uses ketchup and mustard as a weapon, but you have to admit that would not fit in the DCEU. The DCEU has a much darker tone than the Batman animated series Condiment King was created for, and if he was in the DCEU they would have to make him incredibly deadly for it to work properly. This guy would basically just use allergies as a weapon, and I don't mean like the oh you got the sniffles and your eyes are kind of itching kind of allergies. I mean like throat closes up and eyes pop out of your head kind of allergies. They would have to turn Condiment King into such a horrific killer that he would actually end up being overpowered and probably cause a lot of controversy. Even if it was just like condiments combined with acid instead of normal condiments, that would be absolutely nuts. You thought that they handled Doomsday bad? Wait until you see people's faces melting because they got hit with Dijon honey mustard and freaking acid.
Number 8. Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze is Victor Freeze, a vastly underrated Batman villain in my opinion, but admittedly a hard villain to bring to the big screen, though maybe not as hard to bring to the big screen as Condiment King. And that's not just because of his overall look and character design, but because of how capable he can be and how powerful he is. Mr. Freeze is one of the few Batman villains who actually possesses powers and isn't just a deranged criminal. Of course, he is still a deranged criminal. Mr. Freeze in current continuity is also a deranged scientist, who from an early age seemed to have a fixation with the cold and cryogenics. This fixation likely existed because of key tragic moments that had happened when he was younger, also taking place in and around the cold, such as his father abandoning him and his mother's fatal injury and later death at his own hands. Freeze would become so obsessed he would convince himself that he was married to the subject of the first case of cryogenic stasis, despite the fact that she was technically like a lot older than him, Nora Fields. But a change to the timeline would make it so that this was actually true and that he and Nora had in fact been together before she was frozen, so she became his real wife, meaning their relationship was no longer considered one of Victor's delusions in main continuity. Mr. Freeze is not only powerful with his ice gun and unique physiology, which allows him to freeze anything he touches and create ice structures, but he is complex and unique in appearance, meaning we likely won't see him in the DCEU anytime soon. Not that I'm saying the villains aren't complex. That wasn't like a sick burn to the DCEU or anything, just to be clear.
And at 7, Scarecrow. The Scarecrow has made an appearance in the Dark Knight movies, however those aren't in the DCEU, at least yet. Until this point the closest we've gotten is the Fear Gas from the Arrowverse crossover event of Elseworlds. However, that gas made some insane hallucinations that ended up with the Flash, who at the time was Oliver Queen's, speed to be useless, which would be incredibly overpowered when it comes to the rest of the DCEU. When Oliver and Barry were fighting, Barry was landing hits on Oliver despite not having his super speed, and Oliver wasn't knocking Barry away with super speed punches. This being used on a greater scale, like we would see Scarecrow do in an actual movie, would absolutely destroy the world, especially with heroes like Superman and Martian Manhunter. And we know that this is how the Scarecrow's gas would operate in the DCEU, because thanks to the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, we got confirmation that Ezra Miller's Flash and Grant Gustin's Flash exist in the same multiverse. Or perhaps the cinematic universe exists within the antimatter universe. It would explain the darker themes. Either way, we know that's how the gas would work, and that would be a little too too much to handle in one movie.
Number 6. Bane. Bane is known for being one of Batman's all-around strongest villains, but let's not forget that Bane also brings smarts to the table. Okay, so maybe not if we're counting the Harley Quinn animated series version of Bane, but comic book Bane at least is known for also possessing a brilliant mind. A lot of people forget that about him. He was the mastermind in fact behind the death of Alfred, which was also part of his scheme to break the Batman in a much more all-around way. Granted, he also took out Alfred because his demands were not being met. He'd basically ordered Batman not to make a rescue attempt, but then Damian Wayne did make a rescue attempt because he didn't listen to the warning that was given to them, and so Alfred died by Bane's hands after Damian's attempt failed. Bane, being such a massive man of muscle, also makes it hard to bring him to life. He's not only a hard villain to write, but he's also a difficult one to cast and depict as well, because he just looks like literally a brick house.
Halfway through in at number 5, Arkham Knight. Not only is this character loved by some of the people who played the Batman Arkham series of games, the Arkham Knight is a highly skilled military technician who possesses expert knowledge of Batman's tactics and fighting style, which can be attributed to the fact that he was personally trained by the Vigilante, being revealed as Jason Todd, a moment that we all remember, for better or worse. He is a master of hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, and marksmanship. The high-tech military-like battle suit that he wears further enhances his physical strength, speed, and durability. When Batman was ambushed by the Dark Knight, he was able to knock the Dark Knight off his feet with one punch. This absolute mastery of Batman's tactics would make him a hella good villain, however the amount of power he has would probably be too much for the DCEU. They already had Batman fight Superman and win, so they would have to supercharge Arkham Knight to make it an actually interesting fight, which would just ruin the character even more than some would consider him already ruined.
Number 4. Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on what you prefer. A lot of people prefer Ra's, I prefer Ra's. We can all coexist, it's a beautiful world. Ra's is one of Batman's all-time greatest nemesis. While he might not possess direct superpowers of any kind, like most of Batman's rogues, he is one of the most skilled fighters and has one of the most brilliant minds. Like Bane. I like people with brilliant minds apparently. Too bad Ra's usually uses his brilliant mind to concoct all sorts of schemes in order to topple governments, sow chaos, and gain power the world over. Ra's al Ghul is the head of the League of Assassins and has come close to completely defeating Batman in the past, with him even successfully using Batman's own research during the Tower of Babel JLA story to defeat all of Batman's superpowered colleagues on the team.
Getting close to the end, and at number 3, Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy, born on a Monday. That's what the story says. But when killed, Grundy will return and be resurrected in the swamp where he died, and then because you know, that's his thing. This sort of resurrection and recurring antagonist thing doesn't really work in movies. In TV, sure it can work. Introduce the character, then have them come back once a season for an episode or two. However, with movies, those are more often than not like one-time villains that are to be dealt with and then forgotten about, unless the movie is like a two-parter or the villain ends up winning. This kind of concept has to be taken into account when thinking about who would be too overpowered in the DCEU. Solomon Grundy would be one of those villains that wouldn't realistically be a one-time villain. Even if they brought him back for another movie with like a big team up of villains, it wouldn't matter, because he would die and then just come back again. The story would never be over. The threat would never actually be fully handled, and that's just the way the character was written. It's great for comics and it would work okay on TV, but in movies this guy wouldn't work in the slightest. It's unfortunate because I love Grundy as a character, but they would just ruin him like they did Arkham Knight and Doomsday. May I go on?
Number 2. Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is one of my favorite characters in the Batman universe, period. And also coincidentally one of the most powerful villains I think that currently exists in Batman's wheelhouse. She is brewing up something huge lately in the Batman comics and has threatened basically the entire world on multiple occasions, but also has sought in the past to remind people of why she strikes out as an eco-terrorist, at times working with international science communities and political meets to fight against global warming and work towards preserving important parts of our ecosystem. However, while Poison Ivy will be coming to the Arrowverse on CW, we still have yet to have a casting for her in the DCEU, and this could be because Pamela Isley is just too crazy complicated and OP to show up there. After all, she has proven before how hard she is to take on in the comics. When she took over the world, it seemed almost nothing initially, not even Batman, would be able to stop her.
Finally, in at number 1, the Batman Who Laughs. Being first introduced in Dark Days, the casting #1 in 2017, the Batman Who Laughs was Bruce Wayne from Earth 22 of the Dark Multiverse. He was a lieutenant of Barbados, and the leader of the Dark Knights during the first Dark Multiverse invasion, and later the infected heroes of the Secret Six. He convinced Perpetua, the original creator of the multiverse, to choose him as her lieutenant over Lex Luthor, as his vision was limited by his ego. Then the Batman Who Laughs continued on with his own plans, eventually acquiring cosmic power and becoming a bigger threat than Perpetua herself. Yeah, that's right, this guy ends up gaining cosmic power. He ends up implanting his brain into the corpse of a version of Bruce Wayne who had Dr. Manhattan's abilities, giving the Batman Who Laughs near omnipotence. Yeah, this guy is the definition of overpowered. And not only that, but he's an absolute psychopath. He will gut you like a fish while your family watches and then make them play double dutch with your intestines and think that that was a boring weekend. This guy is absolutely insane. I know I said that the DCEU is dark, but this is even darker than they would go. There, in my opinion, is no way that they could introduce the Batman Who Laughs properly without making the movie rated R or literally just being unable to publish it. It's absolutely insane. So yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing him anytime soon. Starting us off in at number 10, BOOTFACE. Okay, this guy's origin is the reason I wanted to talk about him. BOOTFACE's origin was getting kicked in the face by Batman. That's it. I'm not even kidding. BOOTFACE was a thug working for Terminus. He got his name because of the boot print embedded in his face, which, like I said, is from Batman. BOOTFACE first appeared in Batman and Robin Volume 2 number 10 from 2012, and honestly, it's one of the most interesting origins I've seen. And I mean this completely seriously. Everyone else has like relatives die or was living in poverty. This dude just got kicked in the face and got so mad that he became a supervillain. Like, even if he wasn't really a good person beforehand, I mean, like, he was a thug and basically still is, but this time he has a ridiculous name. And a man who is fueled by pure rage because he was permanently scarred by his attacker that ends up being a superhero, yeah, that's good enough for me. Plus, I hadn't heard of this guy, so maybe you didn't either. And at 9, Professor Pig. Professor Pig originally debuted in the alternate reality story of Batman number 666, which I love. However, was introduced as a recurring character in 2009 in Batman and Robin number 1. In Batman Reborn, Laszlo Valentine was an extreme circus mob boss until something turned him into Professor Pig, leading him to begin funding his scientific experiments by selling, illicit substances to the criminal underworld. All in all, he's an extremely disturbing villain and makes me think about why people aren't afraid of pigs as they are afraid of clowns, because if you ask me, this guy is freaking horrifying. Professor Pig, if you couldn't tell, actually ends up wearing a pig mask along with a butcher's apron, and what at times appears to be some form of hastily thrown together surgical outfit. This is just freaking weird, and he ends up brainwashing and controlling various people, and he ends up calling them Dollatrons. Straight up, I don't know what else to do with him other than just run away, so I'm going to move on now. Although next time I have a pet pig in Minecraft, I know what I'm naming him. And at 8, Joker's daughter. Unfortunately, it's not Joker's biological daughter. That would be a very interesting story. But this is just a girl who finds Joker's face, stitches it onto hers, and then goes berserk. So honestly, it could very well be his biological spawn. The only person that I think could commit such an atrocious act like this is the Joker, so who knows. While maybe not being as prolific and accomplished as the Joker, Joker's daughter is definitely insane enough to make this list, even if I'm pretty sure many people know about her. But hey, even if one person didn't and they watched this video, then boom, it's enough for me and it counts. But not to mention the fact that she also went by Catgirl, Scarecrow, Riddler's daughter, Penguin's daughter, Card Queen, and Harley Quinn. Each incarnation also calling herself the respected super person's daughter, which I have to say is going to make the family reunion very awkward. But in actuality, she ended up being Duella Dent, Two-Face's daughter. Apparently, which seems like BS, but we all love a girl with a little flair, you know? And at 7, Birthday Boy. Ray Salinger was a serial killer who operated in Gotham. Under the alias Birthday Boy, he was actually the first costume criminal encountered by Batman during his crime-fighting career. Introduced in Batman Earth 1 Volume 1 in 2012, Birthday Boy is fascinated by young girls resembling his first kill, a 15-year-old named Amanda Grant. When in his killer mode, he wears a burlap sack with holes cut out for his eyes and a birthday party hat, usually in a room decorated like a young girl's room at a birthday party. Great. As a calling card, he left birthday candles where he stole away his victim and told his victims to make a wish to a cake decorated with the words "Happy Birthday, Amanda," which is only creepier since we have our own Amanda here, and I feel like this guy is a representation of all her DMs. I think the sickest part of this character though was that when Batman first started, Birthday Boy had been hired by Mayor Oswald Cobblepot to eliminate his various enemies, and in return, he was given girls from the street or enemies of the Penguin as a reward. God, This is something that you'd see on like Criminal Minds. And at 6, the King of Cats. First introduced in, I don't think this was ironically, Batman number 69, nice, from 1952, Carl Kyle is the brother of Selina Kyle, who was inspired by his sister's infamy to become a costume criminal. His cat-like garb and his crimes revolved around the theme of cats, and he resembles a male version of Catwoman. In March of 1952, Gotham City was struck by a series of feline-related crimes, perpetrated not by the now reformed Selina Kyle, but by a costume criminal known as the King of Cats. Carl sends flowers to Selina, causing Batman to investigate her involvement, like the jealous boyfriend he is. He soon becomes convinced that she is innocent, but asks that her, the expert on feline-themed crimes, didn't know that was a thing, to aid him and Robin in arresting the King of Cats. Selina, however, refuses because it's her brother, but she doesn't tell Batman that. He gets captured easily by Batman and has his handed to him multiple times. I guess you're a punching bag when you're not a female that Batman wants to sleep with. Sorry, Carl. Halfway through in at number 5, Mirror Man. Lloyd Ventress is a criminal who was detained at Gotham State Penitentiary. Using broken mirror shards, he distracts the guards long enough to escape from prison. Then, inspired by mirrors, somehow he becomes Mirror Man. Upon creating a machine that would enable him to look through objects, Mirror Man began targeting Batman so he could figure out his secret identity. He literally discovers Batman's secret identity by using an X-ray mirror, which is freaking nuts. Mirror Man gets sent to prison before he can reveal the identity, however, but because they want conflict, he manages to escape, with a plan to reveal Bruce's identity to the world, only foiled when Alfred, dressed as Batman, interrupts a press conference Bruce Wayne was holding, instantly disproving the fact that Batman is Bruce Wayne because you saw them both in the same room. However, the public should have also seen this coming, so maybe the people of Gotham City are dumber than we thought. Well, I mean, they had Condiment King, so I guess they are pretty dumb. And at 4, Calculator. While the Calculator now seems to be an oracle of sorts for supervillains, the original purpose and MO of the Calculator is far more entertaining and interesting for me. Noah Cutler began his criminal career by crossing the country and getting into fights with various superheroes intentionally, analyzing and recording their battle tactics to ensure that he couldn't be beaten again. Or in some incarnations, he would simply get beaten and then press a button on his chest to ensure that he didn't get beat again. Maybe that was taking down the information or something, I don't know. But either way, do you know how insanely overpowered that could have been? Just being able to press a button on your chest and then boom, you're instantly basically immune to Batman or Robin or even Superman. That would be amazing. You do this enough times and you can just do whatever you want. Then other villains start paying you to do their crimes for them because you guarantee success. That's freaking nuts. I wish they kept that Calculator because he could have been a bigger villain than Darkseid if he kept going like that. Damn, that would have been awesome. Getting close to the end in number 3, Killer Moth. Having decided that the lawbreakers of Gotham City needed a costume protector just as the honest citizens needed Batman, Killer Moth emulated the Dark Knight in every way, copying his paraphernalia and building on his legend to create his own supervillain identity, like Batman's version of Reverse Flash. He even had his own moth signal that supervillains could use when they were in trouble. Drewy Walker, introduced in Batman number 63 in 1951, is actually the first supervillain Barbara Gordon ever defeated as Batgirl, which I mean probably doesn't support the whole most powerful thing, but think about it. If Mothman was worried more about his twisted sense of justice than money, as he was motivated by, he would have been an insane villain. Wanting to protect the criminal underworld just for the sake of it rather than to get paid, while maybe slightly more unrealistic, would make him insane. He also ended up basically making a devil's bargain to become more powerful, but that resulted in him becoming a hideous creature that truly resembled the name Killer Moth. So, that could have been something. Penultimately, in number 2, the Eraser. The Eraser was the chosen alias of Lenny Fiasco, who turned to crime after living his college days under constant mocking and taunting by his classmates. Fiasco is a professional at covering up the tracks of other crimes. For a 20% cut, the Eraser will erase the evidence of another crime. And honestly, I think that this is the only job that anyone with the last name Fiasco could have. Sorry. This villain's power is a special helmet designed to look like a pencil eraser that can wipe off evidence, even those that would be invisible to the naked eye, which is actually pretty damn cool when you think about it. After Batman posed as a villain to try to capture the Eraser, the villain told Bruce, who he had realized was Bruce, that he had actually become a criminal because Bruce shattered his dreams of going out with Celia Smith. Bruce didn't even remember her name, which made Eraser even angrier, but Yeah, I think that this is the absolute coolest concept for a supervillain though, because in all honesty, if this guy just wasn't an idiot, he would have ruled the world. Straight up, this guy would ruin every single investigation. He could turn the tide of trials. This guy would end up being a shadow government. If only he wasn't a dumb. Finally, in at number 1, Lex Joker. Lex Joker was created when John Dee, also known as Dr. Destiny, collapsed the DC universe in half. First appearing in Batman/Superman number 60 in 2009, Lex Joker is a combination of, you guessed it, Clayface and Bane. No, just kidding, it's Joker and Lex Luthor. Lex Joker hired Doomstroke and Terranado to destroy the Justice Titans. However, after the JTs allied with Batman and Superman, he hired 4 more mercenaries to create the Brotherhood of Injustice. Thanks to Terra, who had gone undercover within the JTs, they were able to attack the Justice Tower, and come on, let's be honest. If you have the brains of Lex Luthor and the complete insanity of the Joker, that's one hell of an opponent. When you have 2 powerful forces in comics, at some point they're just bound to be put together in some way to create a larger, even more powerful villain. And Lex Joker is probably the scariest combination that we could have gotten that wasn't like Joker and Doomsday or Joker and Darkseid.
Coming in at number 10 as a bit of an honorable mention is the Batman Who Laughs. Now, the reason this villain is only getting an honorable mention is because he's relatively new and has had a huge amount of publicity in the few years since his creation. But I still do think this character deserves some more exploration further down the road. As a twisted combination of Bruce Wayne and the Joker from the dark multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs was an incredibly intimidating villain that only got even more powerful when he gained the powers of Dr. Manhattan and became the Darkest Knight. But seeing as how he was then killed by God Mode Wonder Woman, and I do think that the Batman Who Laughs deserves a comeback in the near future so that we can see what really happens when the true Batman and the Batman Who Laughs go head to head. Coming in at number 9, we have Owlman, the evil opposite of Batman from Earth 3. Born under the name of Thomas Wayne Jr., as a young boy, Owlman murdered his younger brother Bruce and had his butler Alfred kill his parents to ensure that the Wayne fortune was not wasted by their frivolous spending. Using his costumed identity as Owlman to intimidate the leaders of Gotham into falling under his control, Owlman was a twisted version of everything that Batman stood for, and every time their universes have crossed over has led to some incredibly dramatic battles. And with the DC Omniverse recently having become a lot more open than it was during the New 52 era, it's only a matter of time before Owlman and Batman are trying to outwit one another once more. Coming in at number 8, we have the malicious psychologist known as Hugo Strange. One of Batman's oldest villains, originally debuting only 9 issues after the Caped Crusader himself in Detective Comics, Professor Hugo Strange was also one of the very first villains to ever figure out his secret identity as Bruce Wayne. While initially depicted as a typical mad scientist stereotype, using a weather machine to hide his minions' robberies with a thick layer of fog, more recent interpretations of the character have seen him as a devious manipulator, using his position of power as a doctor of psychology to examine the criminals of Arkham Asylum and scheming to gain power in Gotham City. It's this emphasis on mental ability rather than actual superpowers that makes Hugo Strange such an interesting villain to deal with, and why he definitely deserves to come back in a major Batman storyline. Coming in at number 7, we have the intelligent zombie, Solomon Grundy. Inspired by a 19th century English nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy was born centuries ago as a wealthy merchant, but after being murdered and having his body dumped in a swamp with mystical properties, he's now cursed to constantly be resurrected with slightly different properties each time. Usually being depicted as an incredibly physically strong zombie, Grundy is also incredibly resilient to both magic and physical damage, meaning that every time he's faced by either Batman or Superman, they need to figure out a clever new way to defeat him. Solomon Grundy has always been a dependable muscle for other villains throughout the years, but it would be nice to see him take more of a starring role in an upcoming Batman story. Coming in at number 6, we have CATMAN. Yep, that's not a typo, there's an actual cool Batman villain named CATMAN, and we'd love to see more of him in the comics as he continues to walk the fine line between villain and anti-hero. Born under the name Thomas Blake, CATMAN was initially a famous lion trapper that decided a life of crime was a better use of his peak human abilities, and even based his initial costume on that of the already established villain Catwoman. However, after years of being thwarted by Batman and becoming mocked by other supervillains, CATMAN reformed himself after some time in the jungle into becoming an anti-hero, and was most recently seen working alongside the Suicide Squad. With all of this character development making him more than just a joke character, CATMAN definitely deserves to face off against Batman once more. Coming in at number 5, we have Mr. Bloom, the plant-based villain. With the ability to plant seeds within people that would grant them incredible superpowers but at the cost of their lifespan, Mr. Bloom threw Gotham into chaos during a period where Bruce Wayne was unable to be Batman and Commissioner James Gordon had instead taken up the cape and cowl. The coolest thing about Mr. Bloom wasn't just the unique look of his powers and his visual design, but how they were able to manipulate the people and villains of Gotham into a new status quo so easily. Seeing this villain have a rematch with Bruce Wayne, or even get to interact more with the similarly plant-based Poison Ivy, seems like an obvious choice for a comeback, and I can't wait to see what this villain does next. Coming in at number 4, we have Prometheus. While not an alternate reality version of Bruce Wayne like several other villains on this list, Prometheus is still a dark reflection of the Batman, given that he had to watch his criminal parents be gunned down Bonnie and Clyde style by Gotham City police forces. Waging war against law enforcement and justice of any kind, Prometheus is made all the deadlier with his helmet that allows him to download fighting skills directly into his brain. It's this deadly combo of physical prowess and ideological differences that make Prometheus one of the more interesting Bat villains, and someone who definitely needs to be featured more often. Coming in at number 3, we have the iconic Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Originally fighting for the side of justice with Bruce Wayne as Gotham's district attorney, Harvey Dent's mind was split in two following an acid attack that scarred exactly one half of his face. Making all of his decisions through a coin flip based on his past childhood trauma, Two-Face is one of the most well-known villains of Batman, but hasn't gotten a chance in recent years to really headline an event as a villain, usually only taking the focus in smaller storylines or as a supporting character. Personally, I think Two-Face is long overdue to take his place as a master of the criminal underworld. Coming in at number 2, we have Bruce Wayne's former childhood friend and current adulthood enemy, Hush. Born under the name of Thomas Elliot, Hush as a child was one of the first people to inspire Bruce on his road to becoming Batman. However, Thomas Elliot was a deranged child, wishing to have his family's fortune for himself and killing both of his parents to have it. After traveling the world and training to become a warrior, Hush adopted his supervillain persona and allied himself with the Riddler to rid the world of Bruce Wayne, organizing many of his enemies and even allies against him. And while the villain has appeared several times since, it's been a while since we've truly gotten to see the master manipulator Hush at work. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont. Originally debuting in the animated film Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, Andrea Beaumont was Bruce Wayne's first love, the girl he almost considered abandoning his mission as Batman for before the mission had even begun. Unfortunately for Bruce, Andrea and his relationship was forced to an end by the death of her father, causing Andrea to begin her descent into becoming the vengeful spirit known as the Phantasm. As a villain with an incredibly cool design and a very personal connection to Batman, the Phantasm has been only recently seen in the comics, and definitely takes my top pick for the villain that most deserves another storyline.
Number 10. Harley Quinn. While Harley Quinn's character design and costume has been changed, it's pretty similar to a lot of looks we've seen her in the past. Mostly what we're seeing in her new series is a change to art style, and with her new role as Batman Batman's ally and sidekick, a complete shift over to the side of being a hero. Harley is of course still bringing her unique approach to heroism, so don't panic if you are a fan of Harley's wackiness and standout personality. But considering where she came from, being Joker's sidekick, this is a pretty big change to her character as we originally knew her. If you've been out of the comics for some time and aren't quite as well versed in Harley Quinn's history, you might not recognize her in 2021 as she's gone from full villain to full hero. Number 9. Poison Ivy. Over the last few years, Ivy has gotten a few pretty drastic redesigns, so if you are reading her in 2021 from anywhere along her recent history in the past 3 to 5 years, you might be a little confused when it comes to her look and ask yourself, wait a minute, is that Ivy? Also, who's Queen Ivy? We've seen her go from eco-villain to hero and environmental activist and spokesperson to dead to alive, and split down the middle between those two warring personas, the villain and the hero, when we literally got 2 Ivies. Then from there she became Queen Ivy and got a complete redesign when it came to her costume. Now she's back to wreaking havoc on Gotham, or is she? Time will tell what alignment we'll see for Ivy in the future. But either way, I'm here for the ride. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want to learn about more cool redesigns and updates to characters that we've seen recently, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Especially in the Batverse, I feel like there's so many Bat characters that have been introduced and redesigned, it's awesome. Number 7. Black Mask. Black Mask not only has a new look and redesign, in future state that is, that I must admit is spectacular, but he also got a power upgrade during the Year of the Villain event. Black Mask was given the ability to change his identity with the added upgrade of an identity changing mask, which is pretty powerful. Also, his suits have gotten admittedly a lot more stylish over the past few years. So for those who remember his classic look, Roman Sionis may have the same mask, but the rest of his look also seems to have received an upgrade. Number 6. The Freezes. That's right, not only does Freeze get a new redesign, but he also gets a huge change in the fact that he was joined by his family, becoming a little supervillain fam jam unit all their own. 2 separate units really. In the main continuity, Mr. Freeze was given a serum by Luthor that allowed him to make his long-lasting wish come true. He was able to revive, cure, and become reunited with his frozen love Nora, who also ended up joining him in a life of crime. Yay! However, while it all started out sweet, their reunion would quickly turn sour when Nora became resentful of Victor for making so many choices for her and, in her eyes, trying to control her. Victor blamed the serum for her change of heart, but I mean, who really knows? I feel like Nora's kinda got a bit of a point, even though I feel really bad for Victor in this scenario. In Batman issue 96, we are treated to an alternate Victor Freeze who commits crimes alongside his sons as a little criminal family unit. Super cute. Number 5. Man-Bat. While so many supervillains are getting power upgrades, additional allies, and more horrifying redesigns, Man-Bat is going the other way with it. Man-Bat is KIRK LANGSTROM, who ends up joining the Justice League Dark and gets a much more adorable character redesign as a result. He looks a lot less monstrous and a lot more humanoid and cute. Kinda geeky. It's great. He even wears a bow tie. Ah! This is likely a redesign meant to symbolize Man-Bat having tackled some of his personal demons and his move more towards a heroic role as opposed to a completely tortured soul and uncontrollable monster. Number 5. Scarecrow. Scarecrow already looked pretty terrifying in the comics, but now he looks intimidating as well. Very intimidating. Not just maniacal and crazed. We got a fresh look at the Scarecrow redesign in previews for Infinite Frontier, and then in all his glory in the actual comic itself in issue 0. Here, a Scarecrow appears to wear a gas mask with straw or sticks coming out of his head, almost like a crown. He is armed with long fingernails or claws at the end of his gloves, evoking a sort of Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street feel, especially as these claws seem to be directly connected to vials of fear toxin, which have tubes connecting to Scarecrow's headpiece? That's what it looks like to me. I think the idea is possibly that Crane is producing the fear toxin himself from his own mind and sending it down to these vials to be dispersed whenever he manages to scratch an enemy with one of his needle-pointed claws. All in all, it's a pretty intense look that might leave you asking who this character is, but kind of in a good way, as I consider this redesign to be an upgrade to the villain. Number 4. Catwoman. Catwoman in Batman Earth 1 has come in with a wild new look that will leave you floored. I mean, you will admittedly still recognize her, just not as the Catwoman that you're used to seeing. This version of Catwoman, instead of wearing her typical black or dark purple catsuit, looks a lot more noticeable and bold by comparison in terms of her design, especially for a thief. Here we see Catwoman donning a purple crop top and hot pants with striped thigh-high socks. She still sports a purple color motif at least though, so that helps with the recognition. Also, she has a paw print belt buckle and a cat mask, a literal cat mask, and she's got a cat on her shirt. Still, this look and redesign for the character is definitely very different. Very unique, I would say. Number 3. Bane. Really, Bane's daughter goes by the alias of Vengeance, but she definitely looks and seems to be following in her supposed father's footsteps. Bane's daughter was first introduced in the new Joker series in issue number 2, and is revealed to be the daughter of the supervillain who went through a series of experiments to give her super strength like her dad. Her mission is to get revenge for his death, and she's doing so by hunting down the Joker, who she and many others believe was responsible for the events and many deaths of A-Day. Her father, who was in ARKHAM Asylum at the time, was one of the victims of that attack and died. So Bane Jr., aka Vengeance, is out for blood. Number 2. Clayface. You really won't recognize Clayface in the new Batman Earth 1 volume. Clayface is not very recognizable here in terms of the story, as he is disguised for most of his appearance and in terms of his character design. Near the end of the story, we learn that Adrian Arkham, Bruce's grandfather, who returned from the dead, was in actuality Clayface in disguise. We're all used to seeing more of a giant mud monster when it comes to how Clayface is depicted, but instead, here we get a very kind of, I don't know, smooth looking baldy figure in the end, who appears to really kind of just be a man. Like a man who can shapeshift, but just a guy. Like a guy who, if you saw him on the street, you wouldn't run in terror from him or anything. You might just notice his skin was like a little odd looking in terms of its texture, but that's about it. Other than that, he looks pretty average. Number 1. Two-Face. The Earth 1 version of Two-Face sees the character completely reinvented in a way you might not have expected, which is what makes it so great. On Earth 1, Harvey and his sister Jessica are working together to clean up Gotham alongside their good friend Bruce Wayne. After Harvey ends up dead, however, Jessica and Bruce are forced to continue their mission to eradicate corruption and crime in Gotham without Harvey, working on in his honor. But Harvey lives on in more than just their intentions. It turns out that Jessica develops a dissociative personality disorder, in essence becoming her brother due to the trauma of his loss. At least that's what it seems like if we had to explain it on paper. Although never explicitly called Two-Face, the duality of this version exists in the goodness of Jessica and the contrasting ruthless aggression of Harvey. Honestly, the story is so good, you really need to check out the new Batman Earth 1 Volume 3, because even knowing where this story goes, even though I just told you that part, it's still an amazingly compelling read, so go read it, even though you kinda know spoilers now.
Number 10. Poison Ivy from Batman the Animated Series. This happened in the episode House and Garden. This whole episode is very surreal. Ivy appears to have reformed and settled down with her former doctor from Arkham Asylum and adopted his 2 sons, and is basically living a peaceful domestic existence. But there are crimes occurring around the city, and these crimes are being perpetrated by giant monstrous plant creatures. So of course, Batman is on her case. But he can't figure it out. It all seems legit until he learns that the doctor didn't have sons, he had daughters. Ivy had been using the family life as a ruse, and the doctor is a DNA sample to use as a base for her plant people, who she was sending out to commit crimes. Since they aged and died quickly, she was just replacing them every few days, and in the meantime they were acting as her family. But the ultimate reveal came in her showdown with Batman, who figured she could only clone from genetic material that she had, but he didn't think that that included herself. That's right, he was fighting a plant version of Poison Ivy, while the real Ivy was on a flight out of Gotham. He never saw it coming. He was also super concerned when she started melting, you know, as you should be. Number 9. Red Hood, Jason Todd. The Under the Hood, or Red Hood depending on which adaptation you're going for, storyline is an iconic one at this point. The story that officially reintroduced Jason Todd after he was revealed to be Clayface in Hush, but that would be re-retcons being both him and Clayface. Yay, retcons. When Batman was facing the Red Hood, he had to contend with the fact that the clues were leading up to something that should have been impossible. That Red Hood was Jason Todd, the second Robin who had died at the hands of the Joker. And more than just that Jason had been alive for years and training and operating under his nose. Although, I mean, who thinks to look for people who are dead? But then again, this is the DC universe. No one really stays dead, do they? Still, trauma pass? Number 8. The Joker, Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is everywhere since his debut in the Dark Knight's Metal event. At the time of this recording, he's having a showdown against Apex Lex, because he also has plans on top of plans. However, his creation was a move that the Bruce Wayne of his negative multiverse did not see coming. When the Joker went too far and caused Batman to snap, quite literally, he snapped the Joker's neck, Bruce was not prepared for the fact that the Joker had infused his body with a toxin that Batman then inhaled, which slowly Jokerized him from within, turning him into the Batman Who Laughs. The most terrifying part, Bruce did eventually figure out what was happening, but he didn't care, and instead embraced it and began killing his friends and allies, starting with the Bat family. Number 7. Hush. We're talking comic book Hush, so Thomas Elliot, not Riddler Hush. The Riddler will be on here, but for his own story arc. Thomas Elliot was a childhood friend of Bruce's who appeared out of nowhere and would turn out to actually hate Bruce and have a grudge against him. This was because he was jealous that Bruce's parents died and Bruce inherited their fortunes, because he had tried to kill his parents but failed. He only got one. He wanted that money. Now for some, the Thomas Elliot reveal was very obvious. You know, obvious villain is obvious. Ooh, so the guy who it looked like it was. Why couldn't Batman figure this out? Well, it was very human. He didn't want to suspect one of his few good childhood memories. To have yet another thing be tarnished, it's really sad when you think about it, which I clearly have. Number 6. Onomatopoeia. Kevin Smith has written some Batman comics, Batman Cacophony and The Widening Gyre, and well, mileage varies on how in character Batman is in them. Batman was very happy in these comics for the most part, and got back together with a rather prominent but oft-times forgotten love interest, Silver St. Cloud. It did not work out well for her. Throughout this arc, Batman is tracking a villain named Onomatopoeia, who appropriately enough only speaks in sound effects. At the same time, a new hero has arrived on the scene, Baphomet. And after working with him only a few times, Batman invites him to the Batcave and to meet Silver St. Cloud, his girlfriend, just revealing all the things, which culminates in the reveal that Baphomet was Onomatopoeia, and he kills Silver right there, slits her throat. So did he outsmart Batman, or was Batman just not at his most detective-like in this arc, distracted by happiness? Number 5. The Court of Owls. The Court of Owls was one of the most well-received Batman storylines of the New 52. In it, we once more revamped the death of Bruce's parents. This is from tragic accident to full-blown conspiracy. There is a society of Gotham's elite, pulling the strings and ultimately manipulating Batman, pulling him into a literal maze that nearly breaks his mind and causes him to have some very terrifying hallucinations, such as himself mutating into a giant owl, which is a great cover. This society was operating for centuries, and Batman had no idea. The organization only came to his attention when they made their presence a bit more obvious on purpose to lure him in, which is to say nothing of the Talon stuff. Number 4. Dr. Hugo Strange. Hugo Strange is actually one of Batman's oldest antagonists and would evolve into being one of the most dangerous. Hugo Strange was a psychologist who would deduce Batman's true identity as Bruce Wayne and use it to torment him in his personal life, as well as also take on the mantle of Batman himself and at times pretend to be Bruce Wayne too, all to mess with Bruce's mind. He would do things like get Child Protective Services to remove Jason Todd, attack Bruce's public image and company, and also set up clandestine meetings to auction off Batman's secret identity to his other villains. This was a move that would seemingly get him killed for a time, and he was a ghost and then he wasn't a ghost. It was great. Hugo Strange is at his most dangerous when Batman is unaware that he has been found out, and Strange waits, biding his time to see how he can twist what he now knows to his advantage. In the animated series, he used a machine to pull the knowledge directly out of Bruce's subconscious. It was intense. Professor Strange, not Doctor Strange, because that would cause problems, even though Hugo was there first. Number 3. Bane. What list of outsmarting Batman would be complete without Bane? Some of you may even be surprised that he's not number 1. Well, here's the thing. Bane figured out who Batman was from his prison cell and had devised a plan to take him down before he ever even got to Gotham. The plan? Release all of Batman's enemies at once in a massive Arkham breakout, causing Batman to run himself ragged rounding them all up. It was then, when Batman was at his weakest and pretty depressed, that Bane would emerge to fight him in his own home. Not the Batcave, not the streets of Gotham, but Wayne Manor itself. It was a devastating play, and for an exhausted Batman, too much. He loses handily to Bane, who famously breaks his back, over his knee. Batman never saw this one coming, but how could he have? Even if he wanted to, that Arkham breakout was brilliant. It's also from an earlier era that doesn't pretend that Batman could just round up all his villains without even breaking a sweat. Being Batman takes effort sometimes. It's really exhausting. When does he sleep? Number 2, Ra's al Ghul. We're going to the DCEU for this one, although with Ra's you have choices. This one is just one of my faves because it's so squicky. So we're gonna be looking at Batman Beyond for this, where an aged Bruce Wayne is lamenting his lost youth. This is after Terry takes him to a really tacky Batman musical that bums him out. At that moment, Talia appears and offers him the chance to use the Lazarus Pit to return himself to his former glory so they can have a life together. And for a moment, he agrees. He undergoes one treatment, which returns him to a younger form, though far from his prime still, and is rewarded with a kiss from Talia. Only Bruce decides it's really too unnatural and that he can't go through with it. And it is then revealed that Ra's has taken over Talia's body and was using it to seduce Bruce, so that he could then take over his body and take over his resources by returning to Gotham and saying he was a long-lost Wayne heir. Bruce didn't see this coming at first, not only because of his feelings for Talia, but also from not being able to conceive of a father doing that to their own child. Number 1, the Riddler from Riddle Me That. That's right, the Riddler, often mocked by the superhero and supervillain community alike. But when the Riddler pulls it together, he is a formidable opponent who can and has bested Batman. Case in point, Riddle Me That. This is a story that featured a sexy version of the Riddler. It was happening at the time. I don't know, he got plastic surgery, he was painting his nails and had guy liner and a neck tattoo. It was a look. He sets up a seemingly obvious plot with a set of clues leading to a museum heist, and Batman believes he's deciphered everything. He shows up and stops the Riddler, and he's getting arrested. He gets the manuscript back, it's all going great. Or so he thought. Only this time the Riddler was more concerned with winning than with leaving riddles for Batman to actually figure out. He had many people in on this heist, acting as though they hated him, but they were actually his allies all along, even the arresting officer. Because of this, he managed to get his hands on the item he wanted and escape, all under Batman's nose. I don't care, cheesy or cool, I love the Riddler.
And at number 10, Victor ZSASZ. Victor ZSASZ is a serial killer that we've only seen adapted into live action once, in the Gotham series. And to be frank, he's really not all that scary compared to his comic or even video game counterparts. Every time ZSASZ kills a victim, he gives himself a new mark on his flesh. His skin is covered in scars, one for each of the lives that he's taken. And by the looks of it, he's arguably one of Gotham's most efficient killers. He had been born wealthy, but after his parents died, he gambled all of his money away and fell into a depression in which he realized that life was pointless. So he decided that he'd go around murdering people for fun instead, something that became a full-time job of his. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd. For us to see Jason Todd exist in the world of the Batman, that would mean we would need to witness something else. One of Batman's Robins getting murdered, in one of the most brutal ways possible thanks to the Joker, with a crowbar after experiencing a severe beatdown from the Clown Prince of Crime's thugs. That would definitely be a bold move, and seeing Jason Todd come back from the dead would be quite frightful. While we don't think Jason as Red Hood would make for a terrifying villain in general, it's all about the context in this case, and when it comes to Jason Todd, his backstory is one that we do not want to relive anytime soon up on the big screen. Moving on to number 8, the Mad Monk. The Mad Monk, also known simply as the Monk, is one of Batman's earliest foes, having first appeared in Detective Comics issue 31 back in 1939, created by Bob Kane and Gardner Fox. Initially, he was depicted as a vampire who wore a red monk outfit. Later on, it's established that Batman believes the monk isn't actually a vampire, but rather uses hypnosis to manipulate his victims and foes. The monk was then reinvented decades later, into a post-Civil War plantation owner in New Orleans who was subjected to a voodoo ritual by his vengeful ex-slaves. He ends up transforming into an undead version of himself, and later, when encountering Batman, would turn the Dark Knight into a vampire too, causing Batman to have to be exorcised thanks to a serum. Up next, number 7, the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow's jam is literally fear. He uses a toxin that causes his victims to see their worst fears, their most dreadful nightmares, as if they were real and right in front of them. While the Scarecrow has appeared in previous adaptations, specifically Batman Begins, there's always the chance that he would return to this new franchise. But we'd hope that this time around
the scare factor would be amped up. Christopher Nolan did a good job with the character, but Scarecrow's abilities could really be pushed further on the big screen, even to the likes of some of the terrifying images that we saw in the Batman Arkham Asylum video game, which may be one of the best boss battles that the series has ever seen. Moving on to number 6, the Court of Owls. While we think that the Court of Owls would make for a fantastic and captivating antagonist in the new Batman film, we also think that their corruption that lurks around every corner of Gotham City may be a bit too intense for a film that relaunches the Batman franchise. But hey, prove us wrong. The Court of Owls first appeared in the New 52 back in Batman Volume 2 Issue 3, which led up to an insane conflict in which they held Batman hostage and the hero had to face his innermost darkness while going mad and trying to escape their labyrinth. They are an organized crime group and secret society that have existed in Gotham since colonial times, kidnapping children performers from the circus and transforming them into assassins. They've got their own army of assassins known as the Talons, who can even be brought back from the dead. So all in all, secret society with links all over Gotham City who have undead assassins? Yeah, pretty scary. And at number 5, the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs is arguably one of the Dark Knight's most threatening foes. He's essentially the combination of the Joker and Batman. All of the Joker's desire for chaos, destruction, and insanity mixed with Bruce Wayne's intellect, strategizing, and technological savvy. It's a killer combination, quite literally. One that occurs in the Dark Multiverse when Bruce Wayne kills the Joker and the Joker's body lets out a toxin that our hero then inhales. He begins to lose his mind, kills off the members of the Bat family, enslaves his Robins, turning them into rabid dogs, then kills off the rest of the Justice League before teaming up with an evil demonic entity to take out the prime timeline Batman and destroy the regular multiverse. Yeah, dude is an ambitious villain. He was so popular amongst fans that after the Dark Knight's Metal event in which he first debuted, he stuck around for a solo series that pins him up against Batman in one of the most intense conflicts that Bruce has ever faced. Moving on to number 4, Dr. Death. Oh, what a name. Dr. Death is by far one of the most physically terrifying villains to ever hit the panels of a Batman comic. He is also one of the oldest. Debuting initially in Detective Comics issue 29 back in 1939, the character was Batman's first reoccurring foe, who back in the Golden Age developed a death chemical agent from a pollen extract. He uses this chemical agent to try to extort money from the wealthy citizens of Gotham. He gets real scary though in the New 52, when a new version of the villain appears in Batman issue 25 as part of Batman's 0 year. This time, he was a disgruntled scientist employed by Wayne Enterprises, who ended up murdering several people with a serum which causes uncontrollable bone growth. It's with this retcon that he gets his new upgraded horrific appearance, which is a result of him having tested the serum on himself. Just imagine coming face to face with that in the middle of the night. Yeah. Yikes. And at 3, Cornelius Stirk. Stirk is very similar to the Scarecrow in the sense that he uses fear to manipulate his victims. His abilities allow him to make others see him as someone else in order to trick them and get close to them. He creates hallucinations via telepathy. But here is where it gets creepy. Stirk believes that he needs the nutrients and hormones of human hearts in order to stay alive. And the best way to consume human hearts is to prepare them with norepinephrine, which occurs by inducing fear into the victim prior to their death. He was first sent to Arkham Asylum at the age of 16 for trying to kill a classmate, but manipulated his way out of the asylum after being certified sane thanks to the use of his powers on his doctors. He also isn't a big time villain, so the chances of him actually making it into a Batman movie kinda slim. And at number 2, Professor Pig. Professor Pig is one nasty fellow. First appearing in Batman issue 666, actually, back in 2007, he's been described by creator Grant Morrison as being one of the weirdest, most insane characters that's ever been in Batman. Morrison also stated that it was their intention to make him seem genuinely disturbed and disconnected, and they definitely did that. Pig's name is a play on the actual theater play Pygmalion, in which the protagonist has a desire to transform people into an idealized state. Pig strives to do that, wanting to make people perfect, attempting to release an addictive identity-destroying drug via his Dollotrons, an army of genderless lobotomized humans with masks fused to their faces. He's a skilled surgeon and talented scientist and chemist. In order to make these Dollotrons, he goes to horrific extents. The process is implied to involve brain surgery, genital mutilation, and a cocktail of mind-altering drugs. He's also got hundreds of them, so yeah. Dude is pretty messed up. And finally, in at number 1, the Dollmaker. Barton Mathis, aka the Dollmaker, is one of the most fucked up villains to appear in DC Comics. Debuting in the New 52 Detective Comics issue 1, the Dollmaker was influenced as a child by his father, who took him on hunting trips, in which he witnessed Daddy Dearest killing people and then eating them. He would then see his father get arrested, which he resisted, causing him to be shot by a young James Gordon. Barton was put into foster care, but disappeared after a year, later resurfacing as a criminal called the Dollmaker. His mask is made of his dead father's skin. You might see where this is going. His whole shtick is creating dolls out of the skin and limbs of his victims. villains. He is a serial killer, and he's also the one responsible for cutting off the Joker's face, an eerie element from the beginning of the New 52 in which the Joker had his face skin removed. He may not be the most frequent villain of the Dark Knights, but he's still really disgusting nonetheless, and a character that would unfortunately be really easy to believe as a realistic villain in this new cinematic adaptation. Number 10, Ted KROSBY. Let's start off our list with a little fella who was short-lived but totally disturbing. It's Ted KROSBY. Ted is from a limited series called Batman Tenses, which was first published back in 2003. It takes place roughly after Batman's first year active in Gotham, and it really tests the relatively young hero's psychological willpower. So, what is KROSBY guilty of? Well, one night he murdered a crap ton of people, mostly by stabbing them with a knife, and then consuming their flesh. He also skinned his father and wore Daddy Dearest's face on his own face. Oh, and he also ripped out his own eye. All in all, dude is clearly unhinged. He's also one of Batman's villains who gets away in the end, but because Bruce lets him, after brutally beating him down, with Ted basically implying that he intends on killing himself. Moving on to number 9, KIRK LANGSTROM. You might recognize KIRK as the fellow behind Man-Bat, a character who first debuted in Detective Comics issue 400 back in 1970. He was initially a zoologist that developed an extract that was supposed to give humans a bat sonar sense. Testing the formula on himself, as all comic book characters do, he learned of a terrible side effect. It transformed him into the Man-Bat hybrid. But that classic version of Man-Bat isn't the focus of our number. Rather, it's his Justice League Gods and Monsters counterpart. In this world, KIRK is a pseudo-vampire, who was attempting to use the saliva of vampire bats to aid lymphoma research. Suffering from the disease himself, he was his own test subject, and while it cured him, it also turned him into a vampire-esque creature, who has a craving for blood, both animal and human, because vampires are technically cannibals. Speaking of vampires, let's move on to a very notable one for our next number. In at 8, Dracula of Earth 43. Yes, of course Batman faced off against Dracula, in a crossover called Batman and Dracula, Red Rain. The Cape Crusader takes on a monstrous version of the famous villain, who fed on human blood for centuries and centuries. The premise of this one is that Dracula pops up in Gotham, feeding on homeless people, drug addicts, and prostitutes, alongside his minions, slashing the throats of their victims in order to hide their bite marks, thus attempting to hide their true identity. But that ain't fooling Bruce Wayne. He gets right on it and fights Dracula, and it's exactly what you think it would be. Moving on to number 7, the Penguin. The Penguin is typically one of Bruce's more classy villains. He's done some pretty atrocious stuff over the years, but always manages to pull off his heinous actions with panache. That is, in the comics, for the most part. This version of Oswald that we're looking at though for this number comes out of a different DC universe, the Gothamverse. The Penguin, played by Robin Lord Taylor, has a moment in season 2 in an episode titled Wrath of the Villains Into the Woods, where he goes full-blown Hannibal Lecter. For context, poor Gothamverse Penguin doesn't have the sweetest of relationships with his stepmother. She's a bit of a menace, and is the reason why his Daddy Dearest is dead. She also treats him like crap too. So what does a grade A criminal psychopath like him do? He whips up a meal for his stepmama, feeds it to her, and then tells her that the grub they are dining on is actually his 2 step-siblings that he murdered and then filleted, presumably. It's cruel, it's sick, and she totally deserves it, but a bit out of the Oswald canon that we've come to know from the comics. But hey, that is Gotham for you. That show is... it's a show. And at number 6, Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy doesn't typically eat humans, but in one instance, in what was arguably a show of power and simply the hulking mask proving a point, he eats a human arm. For context, this went down in Justice League of America's story arc called Tornado's Path. Red Tornado, who is an android, is tricked by Solomon to occupy a human body. This is when Solomon attacks, beating the crap out of him and ending off the fight by ripping off Tornado's arm, which is now human flesh and not a robot's arm. He then eats it. And at number 5, Emperor Joker. It should come as no surprise that there's an alternate of the Joker who feasts on human flesh. It's the least surprising one on this list, really, aside from the vampires. And technically, it's an alternate who appeared in a Superman title, not a Batman title. Now in Superman, Emperor Joker, we get to see the Clown Prince of Crime really mess around after getting his mitts on Mr. Mxyzptlk and his powers. That villain can manipulate reality. He isn't bound by third-dimensional laws and can break the fourth wall. He's also been a useful tool of DC's when it comes to retconning things. Anywho, Joker is all like, I'm gonna change reality into my liking, which of course has disastrous effects, including the Joker killing certain individuals daily, then resurrecting them just so he can murder them again. But there's one moment in particular that's not for the lighthearted, or the politically correct. Joker, at one point, decides to kill the entire population of China. Also, he can make a classless joke about eating Chinese food, with the food being, well, of course, all the dead people in China. Talk about commitment to the joke? Ugh. In at number 4, King Shark. When King Shark decides to take a chomp out of humans or consume a character whole, these days it's often used as comedic relief. Even in the New 52 run of Suicide Squad, King Shark decided to mow down on one of his teammates, Yo-Yo, which later proved to have a disturbing conclusion when Yo-Yo re-emerged, still alive. But it was funny as f. And that's because, well, King Shark is a shark. Can you blame him? King Shark initially started off as an antagonist of Superboy's, but has crossed paths with Batman, including in the latest DC Rebirth continuity. Anywho, in his first appearance, the character hit the scene by being connected to a string of disappearances of swimmers in Hawaii. You can take a guess as to where they ended up. His stomach. In case you didn't get that he was a cannibal. Yeah. From a shark to a croc, in at number 3 we have Killer Croc. Waylon Jones is a pretty obvious pick for this list. Cannibalism is nothing new for Killer Croc, who most memorably started dining on flesh after Hush planted a virus in his body, which caused him to crave and consume the human variety of delicacies. Croc legitimately didn't want this though. The virus, which also caused him to mutate more, was something he sought to cure, so he went to a scientist by the name of Dr. Maria Beleza, in hopes that her knowledge of the virus could help him get rid of his condition. No luck for Waylon though. In issue 810 of Detective Comics, in an attempt to cope with the fact that he'll never be cured, he ends up eating the doctor himself, which, I guess, dude man, don't eat doctors. Could have figured it out eventually, bro. Probably not though. And at number 2, Flamingo. Flamingo first hit the scene in Batman issue 666 in 2007, created by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Despite his flamboyant circus attire and bright color palette, dude is pretty dead inside. He is an emotionless serial killer who eats his victims' faces after murdering them. He prides himself on how great he is at removing and eating faces, having initially practiced on his whole family. Flamingo was initially a villain of Dick Grayson's Batman, but made a comeback in the New 52, popping up in Arkham Asylum and a few other appearances where he generally acts as a traditional villain for Batman to beat down on before the comic gets into the meat of the story. No pun intended there. Gross. And finally at 1, Cornelius Stirk. Stirk is downright terrifying. Similar to Scarecrow, Stirk uses fear in order to get close and incapacitate his victims. The logic behind why Stirk is a killer is more nerve-wracking though. He firmly believes that he requires the nutrients and hormones from human hearts in order to stay alive, and that when feasting on those hearts, inducing fear into the victim prior to death is the best way to do that, and to season it for flavor. Stirk's story began when he was released from Arkham Asylum in Detective Comics issue 592 back in 1988. The character had been sent to Arkham originally at the age of 16 after he attempted to murder a classmate of his. How did he get released? Well, Stirk has another trick up his sleeve. He's got psychic powers. Yup. So he fooled his doctors at Arkham and was certified sane. Then he stopped taking his medication, which escalated him into becoming a full-blown serial killer and one of Batman's problems. Starting us off in at number 10, the Penny Plunderer. Penny Plunderer has to be a personal favorite of mine. First appearing in World's Finest Comics issue 30 in 1947, the Penny Plunderer, aka Joe Coyne, was a fellow who used to sell newspapers, but after he was caught stealing pennies, yeah, he became real hard and decided that a life of crime was for him. How did he commit his crimes? Well, everything had to be penny themed. This included wild schemes like putting Batman and Robin into a death trap shaped like a giant penny. He's the reason why Batman has the giant penny in his Batcave, although poor Penny Plunderer would later be retconned out of Bat's rogue gallery, and the giant penny was attributed to Two-Face as an item he once used to try to crush the Dark Knight. So dude doesn't even get to keep his claim to fame. That's how much he annoyed Batman and DC. To be fair, he wasn't really operating on the best of business models, and surely he wouldn't have flowered in Canada. We stopped making pennies years ago. And at number 9, Dr. Doom. Now we're not talking about the Dr. Doom here of Marvel fame. Oh no. This dude's one and only appearance in DC Comics was during Detective Comics issue 158, and he didn't even get a real name. He was known solely as Dr. Doom, but don't think that he lives up to that name. His biggest claim to fame was an attempt to steal a sarcophagus. He failed, and then jumped into the ocean and hid under a dock while he was being chased by the authorities. But that's not the end of it. He then broke into the Batcave, but clearly didn't think his plan through because he then decided to just try to use all of the trophies in the Batcave to fight against the dynamic duo. This resulted in him throwing a grenade at Batman and then hiding inside the sarcophagus that he tried to steal. But then he got stuck inside of it, with the blast stealing the ancient coffin with him still inside of it. So yeah, technically Batman and Robin have a dead guy inside a sarcophagus in their Batcave that they never bothered to try to pry out and save. It was just that irritating, and I guess it wasn't worth it. And at number 8, Anarchy. This V for Vendetta wannabe is Lonnie Mackin. Lonnie's motivation to becoming a criminal was that he had a pen pal when he was 11, and learned that his pen pal's life in his third world country sucked balls. He then decided to get woke, and learned all he could about politics. And then he decided that he was going to be the one who helped give the oppressed people of Gotham City hope. Right. Sure you will, buddy. Anarchy's first move was to read a newspaper and then follow up on some workers' rights claims. Eventually though, he stirs up enough trouble and crosses paths with Batman, who then figures out that Anarchy is just a kid. Oh, and while all this is happening, Anarchy had somehow band together a group of homeless dudes, including one guy named Legs who was crippled, in order to help him fight for justice. So yeah, you can see why Batman would groan over this self-righteous guy. Coming in at number 7, Captain Stingery. Can't help but feel bad for Captain Stingery. For starters, he was one child of a set of quadruplets. He had a rough time growing up, and he dressed up as a pirate as a means of finding himself. He also falsely believed that one of his 3 twin brothers was secretly Batman. So Bruce Wayne, being the ultimate troll, decides to get all 3 of Stingery's brothers to dress up like Batman, in order to get him to stop stirring up trouble and lure him out. But really, it felt like it was more of a way for him to screw with Stingery's head more than anything else. I guess sometimes you gotta have fun, right? In at number 6, the Ten-Eyed Man. The Ten-Eyed Man has 10 eyes, but they're on his damn fingertips. How is this even a thing, you guys? Okay, so real talks. In theory, this villain is only a major threat to himself. He can't do anything with his hands without seriously hurting one of his 10 eyes. You throw something his way, he'll go to catch it and bam! He's hurt his eyes. This actually happened too, by the way, with a shrub. He got tossed a shrub, and then he was in a lot of pain. First appearing in Batman issue 226 in 1970, he lost his eyesight from an explosion, but gained 10 other eyes in the tips of his fingers, and decided to take Batman on by demanding the Dark Knight meet him in Vietnam, since he was a war vet and wanted to fight on his own turf. For whatever reason, Bats went along with this, which eventually led to Ten-Eye Man being captured and imprisoned. He would later be removed from the DC Universe thanks to Crisis on Infinite Earths, where he was killed off. Yeah, no surprise there. Moving on to the midpoint of our list, in at 5, Crazy Quilt. A former thief and painter, Crazy Quilt first hit the scene in Boy Commandos issue 15 in 1946. Similar to our last number, he was blinded, cause of his tragedy being a gunshot wound, which led to the character to volunteer for an experimental procedure which would leave him only seeing bright colors. His main go-to from there was to use a helmet that hypnotizes victims with flashes of bright color, but really, he boiled down to committing petty crimes and vandalizing things, with his threats consisting of removing all color from Gotham. Okay? Batman doesn't have time for that, especially when it was revealed that Crazy Quilt was using a water-soluble dye to commit his crimes. Dude, ever hear of rain before? Guess not. Moving on to 4, The Ventriloquist. First appearing in Detective Comics issue 583 in 1988, the alias of Ventriloquist has belonged to 3 different characters in the DC Universe over the years. But for this number specifically, we're talking about the first version of him, Arnold Wesker. So why is this fellow annoying? Because without sticking his hand up the butt of his puppet, who was named Scarface, he's just a quiet, meek dude who is absolutely harmless. Scarface, the puppet, is a 1920s gangster, of course, who was used as a means of coping with the dissociative identity disorder that Wesker developed thanks to seeing his mom get assassinated by thugs from a rival mafia family. This puppet becomes a full-blown gangster when in use, Tommy gun and all, but here's the thing, Batman takes down crime bosses like it's a walk in the park. So a puppet-sized crime boss who isn't actually a crime boss, well, you can see why Bats would kinda groan over that. Not much of a threat. And at number 3, Polka Dot Man. The Polka Dot Man is another Batman villain that didn't manage to see the light of day for overly long. First appearing in 1962 in Detective Comics 300, Polka Dot Man, aka Abner Krill, decided, for unknown reasons, to become a criminal and make his MO putting dots in spots all over Gotham City. As you can imagine, Batman and Robin were like, yo dude, what are you doing? They shut him down real quick. Although kudos to him for managing to catch Robin, which felt like pure luck if we're being honest. Polka Dot Man's shtick is that the dots on his costume do a variety of interesting stuff, from creating weapons or morphing into an escape vehicle, which is as ridiculous as it sounds. Years later he would reappear, and aside from his costume, he basically abandoned his polka dot gimmick, instead choosing to use a baseball bat to assault a Gotham PD officer. Batman didn't even bother to get involved in that one, because Harvey Bullock got to Polka Dot Man first, and then beat the crap out of him, which led to Krill filing a lawsuit against the Gotham PD for police brutality. On the plus side, because of how utterly ridiculous this character was, he has appeared in a slew of other Batman-related media, including the animated series Batman the Brave and the Bold, and he's defeated there when Batman jumps in 3 dots in his uniform, causing him to tilt like a pinball machine and shut down. Character's even in the upcoming LEGO DC Supervillains game too, so hopefully he'll actually get a moment to shine there. At least, you know, for our benefit in terms of humor. Moving on to number 2, Condiment King. God bless Condiment King. Really. He's a dude whose MO is to fire condiments at people. Hope you like ketchup. So for context, Condiment King came to be in the Batman the Animated Series, created by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. He was literally a mockery of the long list of silly Batman villains the Cape Crusader has had to fight over the years. His whole shtick was to use condiments to fight in battle. So ketchup, mustard, relish, probably mayo, you name it. I can see why people wouldn't want to get sprayed with mayo, to be perfectly honest. It's unappealing, but not really life-threatening, you know?
Suspect is a male costumed extremist, armed with what appears to be a ketchup gun.
It's gonna be one of those nights.
Condiment King didn't even prove to be much more than a nuisance for Batman. He ended up slipping on a puddle of ketchup that he had created, and nearly fell off a roof in the process. Tough luck, buddy. Finally, in at number 1, KITEMAN. KITEMAN is the product of creatives at DC running out of ideas when it came to whipping up new villains. Who in their right, totally not desperate mind would think, hey, you know what's pretty darn evil? Kites. Kites are evil. Let's make a villain whose entire persona is based around kites. Yeah, great work everybody. Great day at the office. Oh, dear lord. KITEMAN, aka Charles Chuck Brown, first appeared in Batman issue 133 in August of 1960. So he's a prime Silver Age villain, that's for sure. KITEMAN's whole shtick is that he has a glider kite contraption that he soars around in, along with a pretty silly costume. He appeared twice in the comics facing off against the Dark Knight, and poor Batman, in order to put an end to KITEMAN's shenanigans, had to get a kite of his own to chase him. Kite fight! But Bruce wasn't the only hero that KITEMAN tormented. He made Hawkman and Hawkgirl groan in frustration a few times too in the comics. The character went on to make an appearance in DC Rebirth as a very unstable individual whose catchphrase was, "KITEMAN, hell yeah!" Yeah, you can imagine why that would be annoying.